Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us for today's Senza Fili Sparring Partners webinar on wireless connectivity in airports with AeroMACS. Our speakers today are Monica Paolini, Principal at Senza Fili, Declan Byrne, President of WiMAX Forum, Pedro Ponte, Automation and IT Manager at Lisbon Airport, and Antonio Correas, Managing Director at Skymantics. I'm Kendra Chamberlain, and I will be moderating our webinar today. In Sparring Partners webinars, we watch our debaters discuss a topic on screen without slides. We would love to encourage our audience to participate in the conversation. Please share your comments and questions through the Q&A button at the bottom of the Zoom screen. All comments are visible to all participants, so please keep the conversation polite and respectful. Our debaters will do their best to answer questions as they go along and as they become relevant to the topics being discussed. So please do not hold your questions until the end. We have some additional resources available to you in the chat button, but please keep the conversation in the Q&A button. That way we can monitor it as we go along. And finally, we will be live tweeting today's webinar. You can follow along or participate in the discussion on Twitter using the hashtag #SparringPartners. And with that, I'll hand it over to Monica.
Kendra, thanks so much for the introduction. Again, it's a pleasure to be here. And today it's a little bit of a special Sparring Partners. So like the last one was on utilities, this one we're talking about airports. And it's quite interesting to have the ability to focus on a vertical, because it's the same technology, but when you go to different verticals, what you can do with it is different. And it's really interesting, especially since this is a lot of it is new applications, and that's where a lot of the growth in wireless is going to be in the coming years. And so today, what's special is that not only we will talk about technology, we will show you the technology, if the technology assists us. So Pedro will show to us what is that they have at the Lisbon airport. We don't even know what he's going to show to us, but he promised that he will show. It's not a demo, it's a real commercial network. So he's just going to show what's going on there. So we're all very excited about that. And so today, as Kendra said, we have Declan, Pedro, and Antonio talking. And what we're going to do is I'm going to ask them to introduce themselves first and provide some background on AeroMACS. And then we will start the usual sparring and answering your questions. So again, make sure you get your questions in right away, because there's not going to be a Q&A at the end. So it's better to have your questions in right away. So with that, I'm going to have Declan start introducing himself and the technology, and then we'll move on. So Declan, over to you. Declan, you're on mute.
That's a great start, isn't it? Good morning, Monica. Good morning to you and to everyone in the audience. It's a real pleasure to be joining you on this topic. And young friends, Pedro and Antonio as well. So my background is I've been with the WiMAX Forum for over 10 years now, and been running it. The forum is not a standards development organization. What I like to say is we sort of curate standards that are developed by IEEE or other places. We develop the technical profile, we do certification activities, we build cybersecurity solutions, and marketing and regulatory intercessions where useful. The background to sort of the 2-minute intro, if you will, to AeroMACS, kind of why AeroMACS. About 10 years ago, actually longer than that now, the aviation community asked itself the question, what will be the 21st century sort of 4G broadband solution to take us out of 1950s, 1960s, sort of 24-bit rate solutions into true broadband? Because we have broadband requirements both in the cockpit, on the flight deck, on the surface of the airport and in the sky. And so the leading lights, if you will, of the aviation community worldwide, and I mean the Federal Aviation Administration, Eurocontrol in Europe, kind of representative of 28, 29 air navigation service providers, Civil Aviation Authority of China, Japanese Civil Aviation Bureau, et cetera, held a long, kind of exhaustive 2-year study on what technologies exist that would be suitable for the aviation community. Ultimately, they settled on WiMAX technology, IEEE 802.16, and in partnership with us, they developed technical profiles for which they called AeroMACS for the aviation community, which delivers a 4G broadband secure solution for surface connectivity. This is an important distinction for the surface of the airport. The other two technologies that they settled on, this community, are Satcom, satellite communications, and a technology called LDAX for en route and transoceanic flight. So we have been spending really the last 7-8 years finalizing all the technical profiles, which was a really heavy lift, because in the aviation community, that required going all the way up to the International Civil Aviation Organization and getting what are called SARPs, Standards and Recommended Practices, drafted and voted on by over 180 nations. So we're talking the UN here, right? And so that is done. In parallel, all the avionics standards are done. And so I'm delighted to report that we have a cybersecurity, finalized profiles, et cetera, all in place. And we're beginning to see, and Pedro will speak to this today undoubtedly, we're beginning to see now sort of commercial networks being installed, beginning with airport networks around the world. And we probably have 40 to 50 networks in 10 to 15 countries around the world. And almost all continents are represented in that group. So that's the background. I'll stop there because there's a lot more interesting things to talk about, I'm sure.
Yes, and we're going to go to Antonio next. And as you say, this is just not just the US or some parts. And it's crucial, and we'll talk about it later. It has to be global for this. This is one of the verticals that really you cannot just have everybody deploying their own technology. Everybody has to move in the same direction because planes go everywhere. So Antonio, what about you? What is that you're working on in this area? We've been working together. So I know, actually I didn't know Pedro before, but Declan and Antonio have been working with for quite some time now. So Antonio,
Hello everyone. Yeah, and thanks for having me today. It's great to have this panel shared with my friends Declan and Pedro here. So my name is Antonio Correas. I'm Managing Director and Principal Consultant for Skymantics, where we are a small consultancy firm focused on aviation technologies. One of our main areas are actually wireless technologies in general, and we have been discussing quite a lot with airports about the implementation and the transition of different wireless technologies to cover their objectives, mostly in the US, but not only. So from our experience talking with airports, so airports are complex entities, right? And they have a lot of business objectives that can be conflicting sometimes. So they have pressure to generate revenue. They want also to be cost efficient and operation efficient. They also want to ensure they have reliable operations. And from the point of view of having on-time flights, also security, safety are really important for them. And they also have different types of spaces that they operate. They have terminals, and then they have airfield or landside, airside in aeronautical terms. So this is just to make the point that airports as a facility, as a managed facility, they have to make choices due to their complexity. Now, there are a bunch of wireless technologies, mainly now coming up, right? And new novelties with new capacities, new features, and AeroMACS is one of them. So as Declan introduced, AeroMACS was created from the point of view of supporting safety, air traffic control, but it is also a wireless technology that can be used for commercial applications. It's actually the whole point of having AeroMAX is to be able to have air traffic control and then commercial applications in the same wireless channel for airports. So I think when airports have to make the choice of which wireless technologies they can deploy in their space, I would say that with the wide choice that they have of technologies, they shouldn't look at this more so much as a competition or alternative, but more like a complementarity, right? So each technology can be good and bad for different applications. And the AeroMAX more specifically, it is designed to cover airside, so all the airfield very efficiently. It can support applications for wireless communication with aircraft, with staff in the airfield, with vehicles. It can be used for surveillance and sensors in the airfield more efficiently than wireline. It can also be used for asset management. And I think the best way to see the advantages or disadvantages of AeroMAX compared to it's to compare it with other choices that could be natural also for the airfield, which would be, I would say, Wi-Fi and cellular networks, right? So Wi-Fi is very nice. It gives a high bandwidth, but it has the limitation of coverage. So that's why in the airports it is only used, other than the terminal, it is only used in the ramp area near the gates where the aircraft are parked. And the other limitation is that the reliability. So it is used a licensed spectrum that is shared with other users, so it doesn't have dedicated spectrum. So that means that the quality of service cannot be ensured. So that's something that AeroMAX can actually provide as advantage compared to Wi-Fi. Now, if we compare on the other side to cellular technologies, which do provide large coverage and also licensed spectrum, AeroMAX, I think it has the advantage of not having to depend on a mobile carrier, which would provide the network for you as a subscribed user. Now there is this new thing about private wireless networks, which would make cellular and AeroMAX be a little bit more in the same space, but not completely. But then I think the other point of AeroMAX is the simplicity of use. It is Wi-Fi-like simplicity to configure and to operate the network with the performance level that can be comparable to cellular. So I would just say that as a little bit technical background to trigger more discussions and get back to you.
Yeah, and
hey Monica,
yeah,
I want to say one thing I forgot to mention, which is kind of important. I apologize for the interruption. And Antonio alluded to it. The International Telecommunications Union did set aside and identify 55 megahertz of licensed spectrum in the 5 gigahertz band worldwide for AeroMAX use. And so that's kind of an essential ingredient here, which I neglected to mention, that from a manufacturing standpoint, all the competing vendors will manufacture the same band. And you alluded to it as well, the fact that a plane from Frankfurt to Boston has got to land and be able to operate in the same frequency band. So that's, to give the option, but I wanted to kind of ground them.
yeah, and I'm going to say something on top of that. It's licensed, but it's not like you're going to have an option to assign it. So it's licensed in the sense that it's not unlicensed like Wi-Fi, but it's reserved. So only airports and aviation authorities can use it. Which is, so basically, if you're an airport, you know you have access to it. It's not, you're not going to have, I don't think you have to pay for it, right? I mean, this is something that.
Well, the actual allocation, and Pedro can speak to the Portuguese experience, the actual allocation of spectrum to airport and airline and other users will probably vary country to country. And I'll speak to that a little later as far as what the US is looking at. But I think you've asked a perfectly, you've alluded to an on-point question that I know Pedro can describe his own experience in Lisbon in getting spectrum.
Yeah, but it's not going to be like, this the 5G auction where everybody's competing
No.
and paying a huge amount of money. There is going to be some bureaucracy, but not the same amount of like, oh, it's licensed spectrum, therefore hugely expensive.
There will not be huge fees, that's for sure.
Exactly, because that's not the point. So Pedro, okay, we talked about the theory now. Tell us about the practice of AeroMACS.
Well, thank you all for inviting me. Antonio, you made my life easier, so probably you just told whatever I should tell about the needs for having an AeroMAX in an airport. I can closely say that we were the first airport probably in the world to have a sort of AeroMAX certified network operating since 2012. While the SARPs were being developed by ICAO, Eurocontrol, WiMAX Forum was already working on them. We basically bet all of our money, so to speak, in this technology. And why did we did that? Because there were needs, because we are an airport operator, so we are managing, my company is ANA, so we are managing the 10 Portuguese airports, and I specifically work within the Lisbon airport. And we are the airport operators, so we are the facilitators. We are basically managing all of the facilities, all of the tools and systems to make sure that the airport can supply with the airlines, with the handlers, with the passengers, every bit of comfort, service, whatever they need. And basically, AeroMAX became a reality in Lisbon Airport in 2012, not as AeroMAX, but as a WiMAX 16E. And we had that certification. So as Declan was talking about, we were cautioning enough to start to talk with everyone involved in the technology, and also with our Portuguese National Authority for Communications, which is the national authority that basically maintains and manages all of the spectrums, all of the auctions of spectrum and bandwidth for the telcos, for the operating the mobile operators. And we were engaging with all of the stakeholders around this technology to make sure that this would be a reality for us, and we would have all of the bits and bytes that were needed for having this technology operating up and running. So, as Antonio was saying in his introduction, it was basically what are we doing now at this point? We are using the AeroMAX as for airport services right now. We are using perimetric CCTV. We are supplying Wi-Fi connectivity through the AeroMAX backbone in our operational vehicles. Right in this moment, I'm in the mobile command post, which is basically a mini. It's a bus, like a mini room, mobile mini room. Which is equipped with an AeroMAX CPE, which has a CCTV camera, which can send the images for every incident that's on the airside. This vehicle can move on to the specific area of the airfield and can communicate through the AeroMAX. So we can supply Wi-Fi connectivity in the bus. We can even record the live video from the camera on our VMS within our data center, which is a few meters from here, with no needs for having Wi-Fi or 3G. So we are completely independent of the telcos, of the 3G and mobile operators. We are completely free of the Wi-Fi. There's no problems here with the Wi-Fi. We don't have any interference because AeroMAX, as you told, is working on a specific spectrum, which is protected. Okay, this is a very important thing for us because since it's a protected spectrum, nobody can use it and nobody can interfere with it. So basically, our ATC, our IT network team cannot use anything on that spectrum, and we never seen any interference on this point. I think the technology is very, very safe in here, and with the new upgrade that we did, we are able now to have more security layer on the network, and the handover between the base stations is really quickly. So, but I can show you a bit more around this stock that we have, and basically we do a lot of things here using this technology.
Yeah.
Basically, my background, I'm a computer science Okay, my background is on the telcos, but not on Wi-Fi, not on wireless networks. With the WiMAX installation here in Lisbon, it became a challenge for me, and it's been becoming a really interesting roadmap since then. And we are eager to see if the technology can follow our needs, because there's a lot of needs in our airport for the ground handlers, and it's something that we are seeing here as a need to have handhelds equipped with AeroMAX technology. Supplying AeroMAX connectivity through vehicles is becoming even more a demand and a need. And also the aircrafts. We are seeing that aircrafts are much more are needing the fast connectivity as long as they touch the ground. And what we are seeing now, as Antonio was saying, the Wi-Fi that we have now, we are supplying Wi-Fi to the aircrafts and to everyone that's working around the aircraft only on the stand. Imagining that we have an AeroMAX aircraft configured, and it, as soon as it touches our airfield, so it can connect to our network and it can do anything from that point. Download cargo manifesto, passenger manifesto, whatever. This is the future that we want to see, and we are eagerly waiting to participate on this future, on this bright future.
Yeah. So if you want to show us a little bit about what is that you have there, or is that a good time?
Yeah, I have to switch off. I have to go here. So I don't know if you are. I'm going to switch the camera here. Let me just see. How can I do this? Yes, I think you can see now. So this is basically where I am now. This is a minibus. There's a meeting room there. There's an area for the assistants for the people that are managing emergency situations. We have a CCTV monitor here. We have also a TV that's shut it down right now. And here, the most interesting part is this one here, this equipment. This is the CPE, okay, which is connected to the magnetic antennas outside. And I have to go outside of the bus. 1 second. Okay. And you can see basically the CCTV camera up there. I don't know if you can see it. Mm-hmm. And basically this bus, this is an entire mobile bus, which is connected to our base stations, which are, we have 2 of them on top of this building. Okay. We have on the other side, we have this panel, which Murphy's Law was able to give me a big surprise. It's inoperative, but this message variable panel is connected through AeroMAX. Okay. It's inoperative because there's a lack of communication on the equipment, but you can see the CPE there. Okay. We have at least 10 of these message variable panels, which are giving information through the air side. And around the air side, we have a lot of CCTV cameras that are connected to AeroMAX, and all of them are connected to our VMS. So we have a VMS from Genetec, which is recording all of the CCTV cameras. You can see now, and the fire brigade is doing some emergency testing. And this is basically what I was about to show you. And if you have questions, feel free to ask. Okay.
Yeah.
This is one application that we have at this point, but we have a lot more. We have a lot of operational vehicles that are using this technology, using it as a backbone to Wi-Fi support for the asset management, as Antonio was saying. Let me just switch on the camera again to me, back to me. And so to speak, this technology was helpful for us because we have an air side which is really wide, and there were the needs to install equipment around the air side and the needs to have those equipments connected to our networks. So Wi-Fi was impossible to have it, and installing fiber optics was also a big problem for us because we had to do some construction, we had to pass the cables and so on. The project would take twice or third of the time that was supposed to. And with this technology, we are able to do that in like weeks, or even 2 weeks, or 15 weeks, or 15 days. We can do it immediately. Just having an energy source, which is easy because on an airfield like an airport, there's energy sources around. You just plug on the CPE, connect it to our network, and then boom, we can supply whatever you need. We are using it for, as I told you, for for our airport services right now. We are trying to do a test with a handheld AeroMAX equipped. We've been talking with our good friends from CoverJax to see if it's able to do a proof of concept with this handheld, because we've seen some complaints about our ground handlers because they are using a system called baggage reconciliation system. So every bag that it's put on the cargo hold of an aircraft has to be tagged by a handheld. And nowadays they are using Wi-Fi, and they're always complaining about the Wi-Fi coverage and also the 3G and the 4G coverage, because in an airfield, the antennas are not inside, because we don't allow to the operators to install their antennas here, because as you know, our ATC has a lot of antennas, a lot of equipment here that cannot be interfered by them. What they do is they install the antennas outside of the airfield, but nevertheless, as much as they put power on the antennas, it's almost impossible to cover every 100% of the airfield. And with this technology that we have, we can supply a secure, an internal managed network, so we don't depend on the outside telcos like Vodafone or Mel or Optimus. That's our Portuguese mobile operators. We are supplying a secure infrastructure. We are using a AAA server. We have been testing PKI certificates. We are just waiting for Telrad, which is our supplier, our technology supplier, to issue the final certificates on that in order to put them on our equipments, because we were able also with the upgrade that we did in 2019, in 2019, to use an external ASN gateway. So the handover between the base stations is pretty much straightforward. We don't see any lack or any communications failures on the handover between the base stations. We have 5 sites. 3 of them have a dual sector base stations, and we have 2 of them that has a single sector base station. And we are guaranteeing to cover 100% of our airside. And one of the interesting parts here is that the more metal you have around our antennas, the more reflections you have, the more intense signal you will have from the base stations, which is something that doesn't happen with a Wi-Fi. When we have an aircraft in front of a access point, a Wi-Fi access point, if you're in the back of the aircraft, you will have lacks there. You will have problems of coverage with the Wi-Fi, and we don't see it with AeroMAX. I think it's the opposite. We have the best signal on the back side of the aircraft than at the front. So I told you we were trying to do September last year a workshop here in Lisbon, just to not only to present our network, but to show you. You were supposed to be invited to be here, and we would be gladly take you to our airside to see the technology working on the airfield as it is. Because this is not like selling stuff. I'm not selling anything, but I'm not a seller. I'm a user. But what we've done here is something that makes me really proud, and it's working since 2012, as I told you, and we are trying to push on the technology forward to do some new projects, so involving other stakeholders like the ground handlers and the airline companies. And that's it, I think, for my part, but we can discuss more.
And I guess that from an airport point of view, whatever you do, you want other airports to do as well, because that makes the market larger. You're not competing with other airports, really. So it's really important that you create this sort of ecosystem where you all help each other. Now we have a large number of questions. I'm going to take one, but then you guys can take another one and go with it. So the first one is sort of like going a little bit in the opposite direction as Pedro was doing. So clearly, AeroMAX has a lot of advantages. However, we also have to keep in mind that our airports will use different technologies. And somebody asked, John Payne asked about, how do you decide which criteria? And actually, Antonio and I are working on a project just trying to do that. And so it's important to keep in mind that for airports or any enterprise, any location, you do need to have multiple technologies at the same time, because no technology is going to solve all the connectivity issues. And in fact, not only just wireless, you need wireline and wireless. So the question is, what are different technologies good for? And so, Wi-Fi, clearly does not have the reliability of AeroMAX, but to get passenger access, it's a much more cost-effective, it's a much better technology than AeroMAX. So nobody's going to throw away their Wi-Fi network. Similarly, when an airplane comes in and they need to upload all the video and all the content, well, you don't want to waste AeroMAX resources to do that because it's not that crucial. So it's really important to understand what is it you're trying to do, what is more important, what kind of security, safety requirements you have, and then use it accordingly, and how to get all those technologies to work together. And that sort of goes also with cellular. So obviously you do have cellular coverage already for the passengers and for staff. But when it comes to do a lot of airport specific applications, and maybe Pedro can talk to that, a lot of airports and other enterprises feel like they want to have their private network because that gives them the control they need. So they are more willing to have their network, control it, and then work with other entities to allow them access if they have spare capacity available and if it works. But the more important wireless connectivity is, the more control the airport wants to have. And I think that sort of answers a couple of questions. But I don't know, do you want to pick any other questions here? There was one about, what was it?
But Monica, let me just
Sure.
reinforce what we're saying about multiple technologies.
Mm-hmm.
For example, this bus here is equipped with AeroMAX, but has a backbone, has a backup connectivity on the mobile operator. So imagining that this bus has to go outside of the airfield. The technology that we have is AeroMAX, but we are able to switch quickly to a mobile operator if needed. So we also have, we are using Wi-Fi. We are using AeroMAX as a backbone through Wi-Fi. Our operational vehicles for the maintenance teams, they are doing maintenance on the airfield, for example, for the runway lights. They are doing asset management there. So they need to be connected there on the airfield, on the runway, which is, I would say, 2 kilometers from the building, from the main terminal. And there's no Wi-Fi there. So I can supply them Wi-Fi with AeroMAX technology. So this is a mix here, okay? I'm doing I'm supplying a Wi-Fi service through our AeroMAX as a backbone network for them. So we are not trying to compete here with the Wi-Fi or the mobile operators. We are a complementary technology for all of them, and we are guaranteeing a private network, as you say. That's the key feature here. It's a private network. It's managed by our own technicians. It's regulated. It's certified. We have a certification that was renewed last year. And we have a licensed operator to be an AeroMAX operator in Lisbon since 2015. And basically, that's it. So we are not competing here, but we think and we believe this is the safest way to work within an airport. So as much less as we depend on outside operators, as the telcos operators that exist, the better for us, because this is an airport. So the safe security, cybersecurity features, everything that's a concern on the network, it's also important for us. Okay, sorry to interrupt you.
Hey, Monica, let me add a couple kind of foundational ideas which may answer a lot of questions too. So it was important to understand that the International Telecommunications Union and the international aviation community, really through the voice of ICAO, stipulated that AeroMAX technology and technology that would operate in this band, 5091 to 51, must only be used for safety and efficiency of flight operations on the surface of the airport. So that's a pretty broad, I've never really seen that defined anywhere, and that's probably purposeful, but that certainly allows airlines and airports to use the technology for all sorts of purposes, pre-flight clearances, passenger manifests. You could even be as perhaps aggressive in your interpretation of that as some US airlines have to say meal service, You know, the transmission of a lot of administrative data from like a Delta Airlines operational center to their planes and or their catering service, baggage handling, what have you, because all of that contributes to efficiency of flight operations, right? Certainly, it's easy to understand what that does not include. That certainly does not include any communications to passengers, right? That's a private LTE or a public LTE, whatever, Aircell, Airtel, whatever kind of service that may be, knock yourselves out. It also probably does not include anything within the terminal. There's no technical reason why AeroMACS wouldn't be able to work in a terminal. I mean, you have all the issues of a 5 gigahertz radio penetrating a building to deal with, right? But the commercial applications resident in a terminal, I'm talking about lounges, restaurants, et cetera, would not fit within safety and efficiency of flight. So that's an important thing. I think Pedro made another comment that I want to underscore. This is not about AeroMACS competing with LTE or Wi-Fi or fiber or what have you. AeroMACS is a technology identified and developed by the aviation community as suitable for their use in a specific band on the surface in concert with other technologies. I love LTE. I use LTE. I love Wi-Fi. It's free. What's not to love, right? But you know, for safety and efficiency of flight, and really I'm talking about safety messages, right? A message that's got to get through, or a message that if it doesn't get through, planes might crash into each other, right, on the surface of the airport. It's rare the air traffic controller or airline that's going to rely on a public cellular operator for that service or Wi-Fi. I would even go so far as to say you would probably not find a whole lot of public service telecommunications operators like AT&T, Verizon, what have you, that want to offer that service. Just the risk reward is not there for them. So I think that's a couple of important points I thought I wanted to sort of introduce into the conversation.
Yeah, there are a few questions about the hardware and how the CP, and I think that's sort of like there's sort of all sorts of issues that maybe we can talk about. You know, there's a lot of airports, but it's still, relatively speaking, a small market compared to other, other 5G or 4G. Do we have enough CPEs and base stations? What is the cost structure? How does it compare to, say, 4G, 5G? And do you have all the CPEs you need? Or
yeah.
And there's also another question on how many base stations there are in a typical airport with AeroMACS, and that's, I think, there is no number there, but maybe you can give a little bit more a sense of what is that we're looking at in terms of how many base stations.
Yeah. So let me take a stab at that, and then maybe Pedro can answer with exactly what he's done at Lisbon to achieve coverage. Right. So you are absolutely right. The worldwide size of the AeroMACS market is a fraction of the size of the 4G, 5G cellular market. Having said that, it's a multi-billion-dollar opportunity or business. We're probably in year 2 of a 30-year worldwide, 30-plus year worldwide deployment. Remember, and a lot of the folks on this, the audience members are from the aviation community. This is a community that when they install something, they generally sweat the asset for decades, for as long as they can. Let me give you an example. Pilots today in the flight deck are using technology to deliver data to the flight deck for safety messages that maxes out at about 40 kilobits a second. So children who are passengers in the rear of the aircraft have a multi-megabit laptop experience. Your pilot has got a fraction of that. And so that's because the technology, it's so expensive and time consuming to identify a suitable technology, qualify it install it through an avionics manufacturer onto a plane, that they want to use that technology for a long, long time. We think that there are something like 30,000 commercial aircraft around the world. And then there are civil, orders of magnitude larger number of civilian aircraft, smaller civilian aircraft. And then there are certainly a host of applications around all the airports. I mean, there's over 2,000 airports in the United States alone, to give you an idea. So while I said it's a much smaller market than, say, 4G, 5G cellular, it's still a pretty attractive market. And we have multiple device manufacturers today making all mobile devices, but some of them are portable. They're meant to be principally fixed, but we have handheld devices coming onto the market this year, probably this summer. So you will see the full kind of panoply of form factors and devices, only limited by how airports and airlines want to use the technology. Pedro, for Lisbon, how many base stations did you need to sort of achieve the airside coverage that you needed?
I think I've told you in the beginning, we have 5 sites, total of 8 base stations to cover 100% of the cover of the airside. So we have 3 sites that have a dual sector facing north and south, and we have 2 single sectors covering the rest, the dark areas that were not covered by the rest of them. And we have like overlapping base stations, but with a handover feature configured on the ASN gateway, we guarantee the full coverage. Okay, the CPE is always connected to the best base station possible at this point. And just to remind you one thing, the costs of the CPEs right now, we have fixed CPEs that are installed on buildings, on poles, on whatever. And we have also the mobile CPEs that are equipped and are installed on the vehicles. And the cost for each CPE, I would say it goes around 1,000 euros. It's like an iPhone, even cheaper than an iPhone right now at this point. This is a thing that I've heard from a lot of meetings that a lot of presentations that I did in Eurocontrol, is that the people from IATA, which is the airlines club, everybody was just saying, how much will it cost me to equip my aircrafts? And I just told them, okay, just 1,000 euros. It's like offering an iPhone for every colleague that works on your company. Just installing that CPE, okay. The thing is, you have to mingle with the avionics part of the aircraft. This is something that has to be handled by. And unfortunately, I haven't seen no manufacturer doing nothing on this point. I have some discussions also with the guys from Honeywell. I think Alok Roy is in the meeting. I've seen his name. I've been discussing with them. I've been discussing with the flight with the aircraft managing team at TAP, our local airline, also to do a test, because luckily we've been receiving a lot of help from the WiMAX Forum. Declan, thank you for that. Also from Eurocontrol, because at the point that we were almost thinking on abandoning this technology, because we were seeing that our manufacturer has been bankrupted at that point. And what we've seen is that the technology that we've put our money, our investment, and our time on here had a future. That was the good thing for us, because as Declan was saying, technology in an airport or in the aviation market, it's something that has to be really, really stable. So when everybody was telling me, I have a great alternative for your WiMAX network, why don't you try a private LTE or ELTE or whatever? The thing is, every time there's a new version, every time there's a new, they are putting on new technologies every twice a year, or every 2 years or 3 years, they're putting new technologies here. And then on an airport, this can happen. It's impossible for us to do, because the airlines, the stakeholders that work with us, cannot comply with that. So we have to have a stable network, as Declan was saying. There's technologies that are being working here for more than 30 years on an airport, and they will keep that way. I've seen switches on our ATC that are older than me, almost like, and they are still up and running. So that, as you can see, that this is not like the telcos. Every time there's a new iOS, there's a new switch, so everybody goes running and buying it. This is in the aviation market. It's not like that. So it's a very stable, a very mature vision technology business. So every time there's a new technology here, it has to be stabilized. It has to be for more than 10 years at minimum. Okay, this is my point of view here, and I think Declan and Antonio, you've seen how these technologies have been going through on an airport. Sorry.
Yeah. Well, and then especially it's an issue as you get, to coordinate with others. And so somebody actually was asking about having receiver in aircrafts. And Pedro, I think we were working on this on a trial on this.
Yes.
So there is equipment. Can you tell us?
This is something that, this is something that I've been trying to do for, I would say, 5 years. Unfortunately, I didn't knew any other airport that was using AeroMAX technology. And in 2000 and Declan, when was it? ATM, the World of ATM in Madrid. Remember me? 2019.
Oh my gosh, you were one of the first.
Yeah.
I mean, the good news is that you are joined now not only in Europe. Milan is deploying AeroMAX this March with Leonardo. There are multiple networks now in Thailand, Korea, Japan, China, Brazil. It's becoming really a worldwide community, which is kind of nice.
And this is my challenge for the next month or the next year. Is trying to do a test, an interoperability test between two airports with different technologies. I've been talking with Ramon from Rio Galeão Airport in Brazil to do a test. So installing a CPE on an aircraft, registering on our network. Okay, and this aircraft would go to Brazil and would be registered on the AeroMAX in Brazil, in Rio Galeão. And I know that Rio Galeão is equipped with Siemens. Yep. So different suppliers, same technology. And this would be the good test. So just testing the interoperability as well. Okay, I have a CPE that was registered on the Telred AeroMAX network in Lisbon, and he was able to fly around the Atlantic and arriving in Brazil and registering on the Siemens AeroMAX network in Rio Galeão. That would be the interesting part. So it's like having a plug and play equipment on an aircraft, plugging and playing on AeroMAX networks in other airports. And Declan told me the last time we've been speaking that Leonardo has equipped Malpensa. This is a very interesting thing because this is a new player also in the AeroMAX industry. We've known the industry manufacturer that I've seen it a lot. I've been talking with Telred, with Siemens, Honeywell, I think also, and Leonardo was a bit behind in terms of technology, but having them installing in Malpensa for us, it would be interesting because it's an European airport. It's closer to us, shorter time flight, so we can do some tests with them. We want to do this, but we need to have the support from the airlines to do these tests. I know that China has done a lot of tests. They've shown they are doing a lot of implementations here, and I know that the Asian market is getting bigger and bigger in terms of AeroMAX. We have been receiving a lot of contacts from people from Thailand, from South Korea as well, just to have an overview of what we have. And from what I've seen is that they are pushing forward AeroMAX on their airports. I know that South Korea is deploying 10 or 12 airports with this technology. China has a lot. Declan, I don't know the number, but it's becoming bigger and bigger. Europe, you have two.
Let me just add a point out because there's some questions on kind of cockpit implementations, and you've talked about that a little bit. So China is implementing, if I may, Monica, an electronic flight bag implementation on like an iPad device, and ultimately that will be an iPad or a tablet with an AeroMAX chipset inside it. The question, and you get into all sorts of technical issues which we don't have to conquer on this call, is that permanently, semi-permanently mounted? Is that handed to a pilot, checked out to a pilot, and received back from him at the conclusion of a flight? There are some operational and security considerations associated with sort of a device, another broadcasting device in the cockpit. But China is actually kind of way ahead of us, the rest of the world here, in terms of implementing electronic flight bag implementation over AeroMAX for things like digital taxi, weather, sending weather data to a pilot, really important stuff, right? To enhance safety by mitigating runway incursion issues. And they're seeing a dramatic improvement in sort of in decreasing the taxi turnaround times for aircraft. If anyone who's flown into Beijing will know, it can take 15 to 20 minutes post-landing to get to your gate. And they're seeing a reduction in 5 to 7 minutes of just to get to the gate, which is massive in terms of jet fuel use, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So the challenge and I think the Honeywell, the Thaleses of the world, they probably did a little heart attack, Pedro, when you talked about €1,000 avionics solution. the challenge for the traditional avionics manufacturers is this: airlines have to demand the product. Airlines are absolutely interested and voted for the aviation standard and the avionics standard to be completed alongside Airbus and Boeing. But if you're a TAP or a Delta Airlines, you're going to want to see more than 50 airports in 12 countries with AeroMAX. There's not a critical mass where kind of it makes sense for you to start to take the very expensive decision to, tell a Honeywell, make a device for me to start putting in my aircraft. It's coming.
Exactly.
It's certainly coming. And I think it's totally appropriate that we do some testing, just a handheld device, to go from Lisbon to Rio Galeão, for example, and to kind of prove in that concept. But so hopefully I've answered a couple of.
Actually, I want to follow up on that, and there are some questions, for instance, about IoT that I see in the list. Yeah. It's actually very difficult to have all the devices to have an AeroMAX chipset, but you could have sort of like the concentrator model, which you can use also for IoT or other devices, so that you have your CPE, your AeroMAX CPE, and that connects to, say, a sensor, because it would be too expensive to have each sensor to have a CPE, an AeroMAX CPE.
Of course.
And so you can have the sensor to use whatever low power local technology. So the reach of the AeroMAX network would actually be effectively much wider without having a CPE for each sensor or each device, right?
Well, you talk about workforce automation on the surface of the airport, right? So like a remote warehouse, maintenance warehouse, for example, undoubtedly will use Wi-Fi, right, to connect to the employees' laptops. But now with AeroMAX, you give the airline, the airport, whatever it may be, a secure licensed ability to manage to backhaul that Wi-Fi bandwidth. Now, they could use LTE. They could use fiber if there's a pop there. I'm not saying that AeroMAX is the be all and end all, but it's it's the kind of classic question: do you build your own network, or do you call AT&T, right? And there's a trade-off there.
Yeah. But I was thinking, so in a way the other way around, because you can have like a temperature sensor, which is like a very that one can use then AeroMAX for the sort of transport backhaul, whatever you want to call it,
right?
And that because you're not going to have in the outside, in an outdoor environment necessarily Wi-Fi or even cellular coverage, but you might have.
Well, you could. I mean, the FAA's implementation in the United States, and this was one of the questioners was asking, is over a dozen airports now, some large airports. The principal implementation is what's called Airport Surface Surveillance Capability, ASSC, which is really giving air traffic control a very granular understanding of what's moving on the surface of the airport. And that involves, like at San Francisco International Airport, for example, putting a couple dozen sensors around the runway, around the tarmac, and backhauling all of those with AeroMAX in a secure licensed way. That is such an important application that it warranted the cost for an FAA. And they have a waterfall of something like 56 airports for that implementation. So the United States is going pretty well for AeroMAX, slowly but well.
Let me add something very quickly for IoT. So one of the main features of IoT is that you want that your sensor devices are low power, right? So so just to make it clear, you are not going to have in the market low power sensor devices that use AeroMAX directly. AeroMAX is not a low power technology, but as Stan said, AeroMAX is going to be the backhaul technology that gives you the reliability for the backhaul transport network. So you can have a mesh network composed of your own Zigbee devices, LoRaWAN, Bluetooth, and then you can have a central hub, be it Wi-Fi or some other. You can have a LoRaWAN gateway too, and that can be co-located with an AeroMAX base station, and that will go to the wider area transport network. So it's about integrating different technologies there.
Exactly, Antonio. That's something that's one of the applications that we are using here. We have some remote stands with CCTV cameras there. We have a switch that is connecting all of the CCTV cameras, and we are using AeroMAX as a backbone to that switch. So for us, it's completely transparent to see if the camera is on AeroMAX or not. So it's using VLANs It's using the same VLANs that we are using on our CCTV network. And we are using AeroMAX as a backbone, as a backhaul, as Antonio was saying. So we have a switch. We even have more than one. So we have a switch that's connected to another switch. So we have two switches on the chain connected through several cameras. And those switches are backboned by a CPE, by an AeroMAX CPE. So we are supplying network connectivity on every point of the airside. With no need of a specific technology. As long as it has an Ethernet port, we can connect.
Exactly.
Yeah, I see another question that asks, so why aren't you guys using 5G and NR instead of WiMAX as an interface? And I think that the issue is that, as you were saying, you want to have stability long term. You don't, that's more important.
Exactly.
So exactly. Is that the issue? But could you just say, okay, well, let's just start with 5G as we move forward? Is there a reason for that?
The first reason, I think, it's stability at this point. Second reason, we are depending on a commercial spectrum. And the third thing is we are always depending on the telcos that are managing that 5G. So 5G is not a cheap license, as you all know. For an AeroMAX license, which we have paid, we are paying for that renewal. An AeroMAX license for us, the first one cost us 2,500 euros, I think, at that point. A 5G license, you can count like $1 million or two more, or more than that, to have a 5G certificate issued by our National Authority for Communication. So it's completely different market here. So it's a market that's also being manipulated by the telcos, the local telcos here in Portugal. They are all bought in auctions. So for us, that we are an airport, okay, we cannot deal with that kind of auctions. So we are just basically paying for the right to use a spectrum that is reserved and strictly for use for the surface of an airport, as Antonio and Declan has been stating. And that license protects us from the rest of the outsiders, like the telcos. And 5G, as interesting as it can be, or it can be improved, it's a brand new technology. We needed to have new handhelds, new equipments that are capable to handle that technology. And it's the same question. So every time there's a new technology, we have to update all of our hardware to be compliant with that technology, and so on and so on and so on. It's like always chasing the carrot, like the rabbit's always chasing the carrot. And for an airport, it's unimaginable. How can we do it?
And Pedro, I think the other point that the audience, and we all understand, is that this is a worldwide standard. And what may be available in Europe, the United States, China, Japan, what have you, in terms of 4G,
Same
5G.
standard.
I was in Pakistan a year or two ago, and they were upgrading from 2G to 3G networks. So, and we're talking about implementing 5G for AeroMAX, right? So I think at some point, the community, and this is exactly what happened, the community decided, look, we can chase 5G, 6G, 7G forever and never implement it. Or, and this is what the aviation community has always done, we can settle on a standard, build worldwide consensus, build technical documents, build up a manufacturing community, begin installing it, reaping rewards, with the understanding by the time we get to market with it, it'll be a generation or two out of date. That's the trade-off. And I have this conversation all the time with technologists in air navigation service providers elsewhere, who's like, why are you deploying 4G? I mean, by the time you get to my airport, 7G will exist. And it sort of misses the point, unfortunately. We would like things to be more nimble in the aviation community, but it's that trade-off with safety and security of flight that forces a more programmatic approach to technology implementation, I would suggest. Yeah,
and that actually is not just the transportation industry. In a lot of verticals, you do need to have that kind of like, it's a longer time frame. Right. And you can, if you just keep waiting for the next standard, you just be waiting now for 6G, not even 5G. Then you never do anything. So
exactly.
We have 1 minute left. So what I would like to ask you is what's happening in the US? We've been talking more about
Yeah.
strangely enough, about the other countries. What's happening in the US?
Sure. So the Federal Aviation Administration has been deploying commercial WiMAX, AeroMAX networks for a couple of years now against a schedule of over 55, 60 airports for a very specific implementation. Private implementations of AeroMAX on the US is on hold pending a Federal Communications Commission publication of what's called a service rule. So if you're Dallas Fort Worth, you want to access AeroMAX spectrum in the United States, you've got to do that through the Federal Communications Commission and their rules. So we in the WiMAX Forum drafted a petition over 2 years ago, starting the process, which will conclude in a Federal Communications Commission report and order. We expect that to happen this summer, knock on wood. And so I know there's a lot of demand at airports in the United States to implement AeroMAX networks, but it's not for the faint of heart. It's a pretty big decision, and they are not going to do that without clear line of sight to a spectrum rule, which is coming. So I would expect in the second half of this year to see non-Federal Aviation Administration implementations, the beginning of that at US airports, which will be a really exciting chapter for us.
Yeah, and then once you see one going, or a few, then the rest will follow, because that that makes the network economics of the network. Okay, we are at the end of it, and we had a huge amount of questions, and maybe we can follow up with them later. But Kendra, back to you, and thank you guys all for speaking, and all the attendees as well.
It's a real pleasure. Thank you, Monica.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Bye-bye all.
Bye.
Thank you. Thank you all.
All right. Thank you so much to our panelists for that great conversation. This will conclude our webinar today. A recorded version as well as an audio version as a podcast will be available in the coming days, and that will be available on the Senza Fili website. And please join us for future Sparring Partners webinars. We have one coming up March 4th with Simon Saunders from Ofcom and Chris Nickel from Omdia, and they will be talking about technology futures. Registration for that will also be available on the sensafili consulting.com website in the coming days. Thanks again, and we look forward to seeing you at future events.